Welcome, one and all, to the March 21st edition of Signals from Mars. I'm your host, Victor, and we have a cavalcade of guests from around the world. We have Jeremy in the UK, we have Ed in Kentucky, and we have Johan in Sweden. How is everyone tonight?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Good.
Doing great.
Excellent. So, today's episode is the Hall of Fame. So I was thinking of topics to cover on the show, and I recently guested on Hooligan Nation podcast to talk about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which, interestingly enough, when we talk to people outside of the U.S., nobody seems to care about it. A lot of it, I think, probably has to do with the fact that it's kind of how could I say this? Trollish in the sense that I think a lot of what they do is just to incite clicks online, to incite discussions, or to get credit for reuniting bands that had been away for a very long time. Um, there are other Hall of Fames out there. Some of them are based on how much people are paying to get their names put in there. So what we did to make things different is it's all about the music. And I had people vote on 10 bands that they would use to induct into a Hall of Fame. And what I want to do is have a yearly discussion on 10 bands that we all love and talk about their music and how they've become part of the soundtrack of our lives. And as I was mentioning off air, this is the biggest turnout that I've ever had for people voting. And 121 bands were voted on. All right. And there's all types of hard rock and metal. There's a bunch of different rock acts that were voted on going back to the 50s. All right.
Wow.
So I find that to be pretty cool, actually, that we have listeners that will go back and pick out someone like the Beach Boys or Roy Orbison and say, you know what? I think they're worthy to be in the Hall of Fame because what they did in the inception of rock music influenced what came later on in hard rock and metal. So there are a lot of different bands that were voted on. And one could even argue that some of this stuff leans into the fact that even the quote unquote Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has a lot of diversity, because people voted on stuff like Pink Floyd, stuff like the Beastie Boys, stuff like all types of grunge stuff, all types of industrial, hard rock and metal, new metal, bands that could be considered founders of what ended up happening in the 70s, bands that didn't make it in this year anyway, are bands like The Who, Nirvana, UFO, Queen, Mountain, and even going on further on down the road, you have bands like Rage Against the Machine, Faith No More, Tool. So there's a wide variety of bands that people voted on that did not make the top 10. What we're going to stick to, because I'm sure this will be quite a bit of discussion even between the four of us, the top 10 bands that made it, in my opinion, are all very deserving to be here. The voting, it was very close all the way down to the last few people that voted. I mentioned this off air to Jeremy and Ed. There's literally 1 point separating a lot of these bands. So anyway, without further ado, I think the top 10 is going to shock a lot of people, given what we're normally voting for on Signals from Mars. Going in, all right, let me ask this. Going in, Jeremy, what do you think the number one is?
I think it's going to be AC/DC.
Okay. Ed?
Black Sabbath.
Okay. Johan, what do you think the number one is?
Rush.
Okay. So let's kick things off at number 10. And they barely made it to number 10. They squeaked in at number 10. It is. Wait.
Number 10.
I forgot that I had that.
Oh, sorry, Johan.
It is Rush.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Johan, you are the ultimate Rush connoisseur. Obviously, this band has been a big part of the soundtrack of your life. And not only to you, but to a lot of people that have voted for them to even get into number 10. And I think this is, to me, this is a big deal. They're one of the first 10 bands to make it here. So they've impacted enough people to be there. Your thoughts, Johan?
Well, Rush isn't the easiest band to get into. It's not like they have a master of puppets, but they have Tom Sawyer. So, but they are. I think that perhaps they are the band that you have to spend a little more time with than the usual band. But when you do, you find them to be your friend for life. So I think it's. I'm very happy that Rush is number 10 on this list, but I think, and I have to tell people that if you listen to Rush, you will get. That's the music that you need.
Okay. For you, if you had to recommend, you mentioned Tom Sawyer. If you had to recommend an album for somebody that you want to suck them in and have them start to listen to Rush, what's that album?
Ooh. Signals.
Okay.
Yeah, great album.
Yeah, Signals. I think it's Moving Pictures is perhaps the obvious choice, but if you are a casual fan, Signals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jeremy, your thoughts on Rush?
Yeah, well, I sensed a slight disappointment in Johan's voice when he said they were 10th. But you've got to remember they're one of the first bands that are being inaugurated into this Hall of Fame. So they're there, and they're one of the first. And they're there on merit because they're one of the greatest sort of prog rock, prog metal bands of all time. You know, they've quite a unique sound. They've got a fantastic history, great canon of history of albums, and they changed a lot through the years. But they built up a massive following. There's so many people who just like they love Rush. They just like Johan. They understand the musicianship that's there, and that's what's carried them through. Really, they're fantastic musicians. They write fantastic lyrics, great songs, and not every song's for me personally, but I can see why they would be in this Hall of Fame. It's a no-brainer.
Okay, Ed, anything to add?
Yeah, I've realizing that I've failed my Hall of Fame list, and I didn't put Rush on my list, and that's not right. Now that it's been brought up, there's a couple of bands at the end of my list that I probably would have put Rush instead of them, But I've not been a super fan of Rush like a lot of my friends were, but I will say I've had a lot of friends that were super fans of Rush and just talked about them all the time. And so I, collected the records, listened to them from time to time, uh, but never was a huge fan. But one thing that's interesting is I just turned 55, and I've noticed as I'm getting older, I've been wanting to listen to Rush a lot more, especially in the last few months, because there's, that YouTube channel called Lost in Vegas.
Yeah.
A couple of guys that review records. I guess their background is hip hop, but they're reviewing a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah,
rock
yeah,
and
yeah.
metal.
Mhm.
Those guys love Rush,
Yep.
and they recently did another song off of the same record with Tom Sawyer, Moving Pictures.
Moving pictures, yeah.
And one of those guys brought up the fact that when you listen to Rush songs, even though they're talking about, a lot of fantasy subjects, just the feeling of their music takes you back in time.
Yeah.
And that's what their music makes me feel lately. It's connected me with old friends when I listen to their music through the melodies and the emotions that the music brings up. And, when you think about, even though they weren't, heavy metal, the impact that they've had on just everyone is just amazing. We could talk for hours about that influence with them. And that influence is going to go on for many, many years too, after they're done. So they deserve to be on the list, and they probably should be higher. And yeah, I've sinned by not putting him on my list. I won't do that next year.
Yeah, a bunch of interesting points that you guys have mentioned. For as much as people talk about King Crimson and talk about Yes and talk about other progressive rock bands, Rush is kind of the one that pushed progressive music to the forefront, that kind of made it digestible for a lot of people. And Ed will know this out of the group. Um, a band that has always been on terrestrial radio in the US. I mean, every single day you hear Tom Sawyer and Limelight and Red Barachetta and YYZ, and there's 5 or 6 Rush songs that get daily rotation all over the US. For as much as, again, I don't know that to be the fact, out of maybe Yes gets Roundabout and Seen All Good People played. That's it. But those songs never had the same impact that Rush had. Rush also came along, video age. They tried different things. They didn't just do one thing, where for Yes to do that, they had to bring Trevor Rabin in, and they had to bring in like a completely different band to go in a different direction. Rush, outside of that first album, was the same 3 guys, the whole trajectory of the band. So there's so much that hard rock and metal has been affected and influenced by Rush. And you want to go towards, a lot of people talk about the double bass that Filthy Animal did with Motorhead and Bomber, and Accept with Fast as a Shark, that helped push thrash metal and death metal and stuff like that. I don't think Neil Peart gets the recognition for what his drumming has done to the death metal and extreme metal world. Because before that, yes, okay, I'm not discounting the double bass in those songs that I mentioned, but Neil Peart was always busy. And that's something that you later had bands like Death and Cannibal Corpse and stuff like that do. So Rush has had a lasting impression on a lot of different subgenres of rock and metal. So I think it's uber important that they're on this list.
I almost feel like their popularity is growing, even with them being done, and that it's going to grow more, I think, as these younger generations continue to catch on to how awesome they really were.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they quit when they had to. They were a great band to see live. Every album has good music on it.
Mm-hmm.
Where there are other contemporaries of theirs that have hung along too long until singers could no longer sing. They've had to lip sync. They've had to do, they've also been good at being humorous about themselves and understanding their places and stuff like that. And you look at, for example, what Alex Lifeson is doing now with Envy of None. Sounds nothing like Rush, but with the legacy that he's left behind, I think Alex Lifeson has the cash to do whatever he wants. He's left enough of a footing for everyone to learn from and to continue to enjoy for years, that if he wants to put out a ukulele album, he can do whatever he wants, So
I think it's nice that Alex has done that with that band, because I honestly, I think he's just a music lover,
right.
and he just wants to do what he wants.
Yeah. And
Like,
he's mentioned in interviews he found the singer. She has an amazing voice. He hears different types of music for her, and whatever comes out comes out. So
School me a bit. What's he doing with this Envy of None? Because I actually just listened to this song right before I jumped online with you,
right,
and loved it. I can't wait to listen to it again.
Yeah, it's this second album, the songs that they've released. The album comes out next Friday. Sound a lot more like pop rock, whereas the first album was a little bit more ambient. This is more towards like 90s alternative pop rock, like something like the band Garbage, for example, which is a band who I'm a fan of. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the entire thing as well.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's move on to
Number 9.
all right. The first entry from the United Kingdom. A hugely influential band who has influenced more than one band that is on this list. It is Deep Purple, and the lineup that I picked is probably the most important out of them. Just again, based on popularity, the weight of the songs. Not to say that any other lineup isn't great, because they've had a lot of different really good lineups, but John Lord, Roger Glover, Ian Pace, Richie Blackmore, and who am I missing? I said John Lord, Roger Glover, Ian Pace. No, that's Ian Gillan. That's who I didn't say. I said one Ian, not the other. Okay. Again, each component just so important, so influential with music in general. I mean, again, they've done so much over the years. Jeremy, lasting impression of Deep Purple.
Yeah, I mean, they were actually on my list. Absolutely no surprise that they've been picked for your Hall of Fame, because they're so like you say, they're such an influential band. A lot of the players have gone on to do other things. Ian Gillan's gone back to play, as we know. Ian Pace has gone back to play. Roger Glover went back to play. they just came out with their own sort of heavy rock. That I think they sort of, there's a few British bands that you can say are proper heavy rock, and they're one of them. They obviously had the Talisman, Richie Blackmore in the band doing a lot of the stuff, and they created a lot of hit singles as well, along the way. So it's no surprise really. I mean, they've lasted such a long time. They're still going today, and they've recreated themselves as well. The Deep Purple of today that you're watching is very, very different to the 1970s Mark II, which you put up there. And they've had they had the Mark III with David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes in, and that was an interesting modernization of the band. Very few bands really have gone through so many. They're almost like I don't know if you've heard of Doctor Who, the program on TV where the Doctor recreates himself all the time, but Doctor Who keeps going, and they're kind of like that. They recreate themselves and keep going. So yeah, they're a fantastic band. Everybody learns to play Smoke on the Water. Let's face it,
Right.
if for a band that's done Smoke on the Water, they need to be in the Hall of Fame, because no matter how much we hate it now, if you actually listen to it, it's an absolute classic.
Yeah.
And that's we can't ignore it. It's a classic. Everyone learns to play it on the guitar, but they had so many others. Great band.
Yeah. Ed, your thoughts on Deep Purple?
Yeah, they're besides Black Sabbath, I think they're probably the biggest influence on hard rock and heavy metal. Because you just, especially that, in rock through Burn era, up until Coverdale came in. Coverdale came in on Stormbringer, I think, and much different sound. But, everything they did in those years, you end up hearing in every band in the hard rock and metal world, for several decades, I think. And, every guitar player idolizes Blackmore. John Lord, I mean, he's just like a godfather of the hard rock genre. A keyboard player too, at that. Yeah, just a heavy, great jam band. And as far as the influence that they've had on everything else, I think I have a hard time picking another band above them, besides maybe who I'll be choosing as number one later.
Okay. Johan, Deep Purple, the importance and impact in Sweden.
Well, I think that the album Perfect Strangers was very important here in Sweden, because it came at the same time as all the other US and UK bands, and also German. But I think that the impact that band have is like, if I compare them to Rush, they have a similar effect on bands, that they are some kind of a measure point. Where are the world is going, and with the world I mean the metal world, but where is it moving? But Rush has perhaps more been like, they have followed the world more, but Deep Purple has stayed more in their own world, if you know what I mean. So I think that Deep Purple is kind of like a foundation, like an anchor for our type of music.
Right.
And I think that they are one of the most important bands of all time, of course.
Yeah, I'm surprised they're not in the top 5, actually.
Yeah. Me too. Me too.
Well, I think you guys are going to say that for a lot of different bands.
Uh-oh.
All right. So moving on.
Number 8.
Aha.
Mm.
Van Halen. Um, this original lineup, to me, again, another important pivotal band, pivotal members, changed the game. I mean, let's be honest. We've talked about Eddie a lot on this show. Eddie as a guitar player, Eddie as an amp builder, modder, pickup creator, pedal designer. I mean, just ridiculous. He reinvented what people were doing on the guitar. But outside of that, David Lee Roth as a frontman kind of picked up the baton from Robert Plant and took it in another area to make it so that for generations, I mean, people wanted to be David Lee Roth as a singer. Um, and there's so many huge bands. I mean, look at Vince Neil. I think Axl Rose to an extent. There's, a lot of different people that have come after Van Halen that have tried to glom off of the look, the sound. And I mentioned Neil Peart before, but I don't think Alex Van Halen gets his just due as a drummer either. There's a lot of stuff that Alex would do that was atypical at the time, just different rhythms, different things that he played. And I think as time has gone on, I've kind of refocused and listened to a lot of those early albums over again to realize how intricate he's playing and different patterns and different things that before him, again, the three drummers that we've talked about so far, Neil Peart, Ian Pace, and Alex Van Halen. I mean, just super influential, completely different players, but have influenced millions of music listeners, to pick up an instrument. So I think it's a no-brainer. And I don't want to diminish Michael Anthony at all, because I think his backing vocals also was something that for a lot of bands, it brought another element that people wanted. Hey, we need to have somebody harmonize with the singer. We need to have, and Michael Anthony was a big part of that. So, and to be able to hold down the middle there to kind of be the glue on a lot of what was going on, very important as well. Johan, anything to say on Van Halen?
Actually, as I said before in the show, Van Halen weren't a big band here in Sweden
Okay.
until 1984 when they played Monsters Rock.
Mhm.
And after that, they were bigger but not huge. So they were more of a, what can I say, more like a legend than
Okay.
a big band. To me, Van Halen is American hard rock
Mhm.
in the 80s. And I don't have any specific. No, I like the albums, some of them, but no, it's not my. And I think I speak for most of Sweden that they weren't a big thing here. And I'm sad to say, because they have a high place on the list, but no, I leave it up to you guys.
Okay. Ed Van Halen.
That is interesting to hear him say that, when they were just so massive here for us. It's hard to imagine that. But like he said, they're very American,
Right.
especially with David Lee Roth. I mean, it's just California all the way, isn't it?
Yep.
And, I wasn't the biggest fan of that either, because I like darker music. I'd rather be listening to Sabbath and Dio and Maiden, whereas Van Halen seemed more party time to me. And the Van Halen stuff that I do like is their darker material, especially like on their first 2 or 3 records, maybe.
Mhm.
But David Lee Roth, it's interesting when you were talking about him earlier. When let's see, their first album was in '78, so they were getting their start at a time when everything was extremely flashy.
Mhm.
Because we had gone through the punk scene getting started, and then you started having, all of the fashions and images of punk coming into rock music.
Mhm.
And then you had disco explode. There was a lot of funk music. And the way everybody was starting to dress super flashy because of, bands like the New York Dolls and all that, influencing. And so you had this hard rock band from California come out at a time when, Kiss was probably one of the bigger hard rock bands, but they were going to start going downhill. Then the dynasty to try to stay in the game. But, with David Lee Roth, he was able to kind of shine through all of that stuff. Don't you think? I mean, he cut through all of that and was able to make everybody look at Van Halen, by doing his own thing, too. He was such a character. And then him, along with Eddie's playing, I mean, what a duo to be working together, to be able to make themselves noticed with all that other stuff that was going on in the music world at the time.
Mhm.
So what they did was legendary. And yeah, another band that no musician does not talk about and honor and respect. And um, I'm favor guitar players like Randy Rhoads more than Eddie, but he is just super amazing. And I also love his amp work. His 5150 series, I think, is my favorite sound I've ever heard.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeremy?
Yeah, they blew me away. They blew everybody away in the UK. We were listening to sort of very sort of classic rock stuff, as the new wave of British heavy metal, and then I think the first album sort of passed us by a little bit. It came a bit later, and then I remember listening to Fair Warning with some friends, and just listening to the quality of the musicianship on that, and thinking, this is a totally different level to the stuff that the British bands are playing, really. Um, I also think that Van Halen, the reason why they're voted in here is that I remember somebody saying to me once, you can almost dance to every Van Halen track. They're a very danceable band, and the reason is because they've got that sort of very boppy sound to them. It's that bass line by Michael Anthony. It's really sort of happy, sort of boppy stuff, and so they really got the commercial aspect of it as well. There's a lot of metal bands out there that don't get that, and they did. And then they brought out a series of hits later on. But you're right about Dave Lee Roth. I mean, he was probably the ultimate frontman, really.
Mhm.
At that time, and they were very influential in terms of obviously guitaring, as we know. Eddie Van Halen. We don't really need to go on about that because we know what an amazing guitarist he was and how he influenced so many people. So yeah, they didn't always get it right. They didn't always produce the greatest albums, but they were extremely influential. And I think even today, you listen back to some of their stuff and just think it was mind blowing for the time, really.
Yep. Agreed. All right. So let's move on to
Number 7.
this band. Always a topic of discussion of where they're actually from. Some people claim them as their own. Others people claim them as their own as well. but at the end, they finished conquering the entire world. AC/DC.
Never heard of them.
Ed, since you've hardly ever heard of them and you've barely talked about them on the show, you lead the AC/DC talk.
Gosh, where do I start with that? I put them number 6 on my list. A lot of my choices will be in order of, when they came out, who preceded who. Sometimes, you got to honor and respect those who came before you. So they were in the middle of my list, right after, like Kiss for me,
Okay.
as far as influence on everything that came after that. And again, that's a band where the characters in the band were just as, interesting as the music.
Mm-hmm.
So there was, Bon Scott and Angus Young, especially, just two of the most amazing frontmen and musicians for the rock and roll genre of all time. And gosh, so sad too that Bon hasn't been around as we grew up.
Right.
He died before I even got the chance to start listening to AC/DC and collecting their music. But they were the band that excited me the most when I was growing up, and I wanted nothing more than to be like Angus Young, to grow up and do something like he was just always so fun. I mean, I loved rock and roll, but he made me love it even more. I mean, he makes you feel it.
Right.
I struggle for the words to say how important I think they are, but I really don't need to, because I know everybody gets it.
Mm.
And I think that, even though I like Bon Scott the most, and the Let There Be Rock, especially the song Let There Be Rock, is, I just think, like one of the pinnacle moments of rock and roll of all time. Back in Black is like the most amazingly produced record I've ever heard. I don't think I can think of any record that sounds better than the way that record is. As a matter of fact, I heard from time to time on podcasts people talking about it, that a lot of times producers in the studio will use that album as a gauge as they're trying to mix a sound for, bands that they're recording. And that makes a lot of sense. Kind of wish that Mutt Lange had been around for another couple records. It would have been interesting to see what he could have done with like Flick of the Switch and Fly on the Wall. But yeah, I better stop or I'll take up too much time, because I really love this band.
If Mutt Lange would have still been around, because he did Back in Black, did he do For Those About to Rock as well?
Yeah, he did Highway to Hell through.
Okay, that's
Those
right.
About
That's
to
right.
Rock.
Yeah. Okay.
Which you can tell each album has his sound on it.
Right.
And then it showed back up in Shania Twain about 15 years later.
The funny thing there
Yeah.
is with AC/DC, he didn't have that. We have to work 6 months on the snare sound deal.
Yeah.
He wasn't in that dynamic yet.
Yeah.
So imagine if he had started working with Def Leppard already, done Pyromania, and then he goes back to AC/DC. Fly on the Wall and Flick of the Switch may have never come out.
Yeah.
They may have gone straight to Blow Up Your Video, because
Maybe
it
so.
would have taken them to record.
I know I said I was going to shut up, but I also have to bring up too the rhythm section. Malcolm and Phil. I mean, they hold it all together like no other rhythm section does, and they're just back there pounding away the beat, and it's just marvelous stuff. But yeah, go ahead, Johan or Jeremy.
Go ahead, Johan, AC/DC.
Yeah. What can I say about them that hasn't already been said? But poof, one of the greatest band of all time, of course. Um, the first time I saw them was at Blow Up Your Video tour at in Gothenburg, 1987, perhaps, and they were with me forever since and before that. They are something special. They are a rock and roll band that are, they are whatever that um, whatever that's popular. It doesn't nothing. ACDC is always popular.
Mhm.
When they come to Sweden, they can sell out the biggest arenas, and I think that's similar to all over the world.
Mhm.
No matter what music style is popular at the time.
Right.
So, yeah. And for me, personal, I like the 80s AC/DC. I like Blow Up Video, Flick of the Switch. Um, for those about the rock LP, Fly on the Wall. Those were the albums that I grew up with, and fantastic band. And everything has been said about them. So I'm curious what Jeremy what has he has to say about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can only echo a lot of what you've said. I mean, what I think is that AC/DC are actually their own genre in their own right, really, because they are very unique in their sound. But the other thing I would say is that a lot of people seem to like AC/DC who don't like other types of rock bands as well. So they seem to sort of cross over. There'll be a lot of people who like disco and whatever, other types of music. But they are all. Everybody's heard of AC/DC. I mean, you probably your grandmother and your great grandmother have heard of AC/DC, but they've never heard of any other rock band that's ever existed, because they are quite ubiquitous, really. And there's a reason why they're successful, and there's been some research done on this actually. Their beat that they do, on many of their records, that sort of steady beat is the beat of the heartbeat. And so anything that's in line with your heartbeat, many people like as a
It
music.
feels good.
It feels good. Yeah. Yeah. So there's that. And obviously there's a huge amount of tribute bands out there that are selling out because people still want to hear AC/DC music everywhere. I was brought up on Whole Lot of Rosie because we played that at parties in garages when we were, 13 years old or whatever. And we were headbanging in a garage on the stone floor to Whole Lot of Rosie. That was my introduction. I had Highway to Hell. I just think, you couldn't have a Hall of Fame without AC/DC.
You know what they kind of took. They made all the exciting rock and roll of decades past, and they brought it to us, through their music and through their stage presence. Like we talked about Chuck Berry. Angus Young was Chuck Berry for our generation. They were channeling guys like that and allowing us to feel the excitement of what all those guys created before we were born.
Mm-hmm.
And and they did it unlike any other band could, I think, of those years.
Yeah. But also another great thing, all the great bands have a gimmick. And obviously they had Angus Young with his shorts on and his cap on, his school uniform. And what that really is they had everything really that went for them. They had the music, but they also had the gimmick as well. And
Sure
you got a
did.
winner.
Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. So
What number was that? Were they at 7?
They were at 7.
Yeah. That's fair, probably.
Okay.
Number 6.
I wish I could use music to intro these bands. That was one of the things this afternoon when I was putting all this together. I'm like, I have songs in my head for each of these that would have been cool to be able to play a little snippet, put the picture up, and then talk about. But unfortunately, we would get hit with, all types of claims about copyright and have the videos thrown off, and then the podcast couldn't go up on Apple Music and Spotify, especially. So anyway, in my head is the intro to their 1991 album, which brought on a new drummer, a heavier sound. Um, it probably gave someone who wasn't into them a headache, and oh yeah, they probably needed a painkiller of some sort. At
Yeah.
number 6,
Yeah.
Judas Priest. Jeremy?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I was brought up on Judas Priest when I was young. They were the greatest band at the time. I remember getting British Steel. Obviously, I went straight into their very commercial period, but that's what commercial periods are all about. They attract all
Right.
the fans in, and everybody likes those sort of commercial songs at the time. Um, they are extremely influential, as we know. In terms of their look, in terms of they really sort of they sort of epitomize what a heavy metal band is, really, without it being too extreme. Just something that you can get your teeth into, and you can
Yeah.
really feel that heaviness, those riffs, those that screaming, that melody, and you put it all together into a metal band. What would you come out with? You'd probably come out with something that looks like Judas Priest. They sort of they talk about the devil, but they shun the devil. They look a little bit scary on stage at times. Well, they did in the old days, with the studs and the leather and the motorbikes and they just had it all, really. But the main thing is they had this lovely dual guitar attack, which was great on the early albums as well. Even before they sort of got into the really heavy stuff. And they had Rob Halford, who really reaches pitches that no other singer can do. And they have such a canon now of great songs. It's hard to put all of them into a set. So probably one of the greatest British bands, and they started well before the new wave of British heavy metal as well. We've got to remember that. They were going in the 70s, and they were sort of cultivating their sound and modernizing it a little bit as they went along. And they're still going now. Okay, it's not the entire band, but it's quite a lot of them, and they're still selling out shows and playing really well. So hats off to Judas Priest. They're brilliant.
Johann, Judas Priest?
Well, the first record I've heard was British Steel, of course, and it was an opening. And the first record I bought were Defenders of the Faith. I think that Judas Priest is one of the best metal bands of all time. To me, the journey started with Defenders, but I went back and discovered Sad Wings of Destiny and Killing Machine, and I still listen to those records this day, and they are still a band. They are not the best live band now, but they are okay, and they can, for somehow, the old song they had, they can still produce, what do you say, it's present them to the audience in a fashionable way. So to me, Judas Priest is they are, I try to look at my Apple Music to what I listen to, and Judas Priest, all the areas, I still love. I mean, like for example, the album Turbo is for me an album that I hold very close to my heart because they changed the direction, but I think somehow when they changed that direction, they uh, efforted. They tried to make something different, and when they did that, it was good. Um if you know what I mean,
Mhm.
Victor, do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I understand.
Yeah, yeah. So they are. Hmm, Judas Priest is ah, very close to my heart, and they are very honored. They should be on this list, and I think it's good. Sorry for the bad English. It's been a while. I don't speak English at my normal day, so this is it's been a while.
We're
Sorry.
just happy you're here, buddy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
doing
yeah.
fine.
You don't worry about that.
Yep,
We all understand metal, so no problem.
there you go. Ed.
Oh yeah, and this was the hardest band for me to figure out where to put them. Uh, between Kiss, AC/DC, and Judas Priest, and I ended up putting Kiss and AC/DC higher than Priest because like it seems the whole world knows Kiss and AC/DC. With Judas Priest, not everybody in the world knows them, but their influence in the metal world is probably the greatest of all. Because they weren't just influential; they were pioneering.
Mhm.
I even had a friend who passed away a long time ago suddenly, or sadly, but he was one of my best music buddies, and he was the kind of guy that would spend a lot of money buying Venom imports, and just had everything that you wanted. And he would make the argument that Judas Priest is when heavy metal started.
Mhm.
Uh, because of the difference in kind of the removal of that bluesy rock sound that you heard up until then with Sabbath. And I don't quite agree with that point, but I get what he's saying, and especially the imagery of Judas Priest. I can't think of anything that's influenced like the imagery of all of metal more than Priest. Um, so if this was like a list for just purely the heavy metal genre, besides Black Sabbath, Priest would be at number 2 for me. They're that big and influential in the heavy metal genre, and what you all had to say about their songs, um, and the way even the music has influenced all the music we've grown up with other bands. I totally agree with every bit of that. It's true.
So, Ed, I agree with your friend. To me, Judas Priest removed the blues from Sabbath,
Yeah, they did.
put gasoline on it, and
And put on leather.
started
Bike.
metal.
Yeah.
And they're
Motorcycle out.
they've never shied away from they've never shied away from the fact that they were a metal band.
No.
So that's why I've always considered them the first metal band
Yeah,
because
I do get that.
yeah, yeah. Edgar Winterson, thank you for joining us. He's saying you wrong. Outside of the U.S., Priest is way bigger than Kiss.
That is true. But I think on a total global scale, people around the world would know the name Kiss more than Judas Priest.
Yeah, and
If you expand that outside of the UK or in Europe and stuff.
um, we'll touch upon this.
Yeah, that'd be a good discussion one day, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we'll touch upon that whole thing. How about at
Number 5.
No.
There they are.
Uh,
Shock me.
there you go. Um, Priest, yes. Okay, so this was a discussion that I had yesterday, guesting on another show. Kiss really didn't break it huge in Europe until the reunion tour. People knew who they were. The music
Say that again. Until the
until
2000
the
reunion tour.
96 reunion tour, Kiss did not
Huh.
move big numbers in all of Europe.
They did in Japan, just not Europe, right? Yeah.
Just Europe. Kiss has always been huge. US, Australia, Japan, and South America.
Yeah.
Always. They've had issues in Africa and in Europe. They had issues breaking through. And Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, there's still a good percentage of the public that does not like Kiss because they can't look beyond the image and consider them on their music alone.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. So the snobbish music critic, oh, they're the Stones are more this and that. Yet the Stones have jumped on every bandwagon as well over the years. There's I don't know how many bands that I could get into, but we're talking about Kiss now. Kiss is my favorite band of all time. Was the first thing that I listened to and saw when I was 4 years old. To me, they're probably the band that has touched on more bands from the 70s onwards, and you can criticize whether in the 80s they did this, they did that, blah, blah, blah. Bottom line, you talk to a lot of hard rock or metal players or even people out of the genre, and they'll tell you that Kiss is what made them pick up instruments. Kiss is the first band to revolutionize the live experience. And I don't care how many people have said to me over the years, no, but the Grateful Dead did this and the Who did that. Pyrotechnics, a sound system, lighting rigs. None of these bands had all of that. And that's without getting into the merchandising aspect. And for as many bands have shit on them over the years for what they do with merch, how many of those same bands has followed them? So to me, Kiss should be on here. You can debate whether they should be higher or lower. Bottom line is their importance is universal in music. And Edgar is posting a bunch of emojis in the chat. There you go. Anyway, Ed, Kiss.
I think that's the right spot for them. Was that 5 or 6?
It's 5. It's 5.
But yeah, that's the perfect spot for Kiss. I'm curious though, Johan and Jeremy. So how old are you two? You're both my age, right?
I'm nearly 58, so I'm a bit older than you.
I'm 52.
Okay, so you're my age. So when you were like 7 years old, was Kiss on TV? Were you hearing about Kiss from friends or seeing any of their records or any of this merchandise? Or was it just you never saw or heard about them?
Not at that age, no. It was much later for me.
Because, like I understand why some people think they're silly and gimmicky. But still, man, you got to understand when you're a 7-year-old kid in the 70s and you're all into comic books and $6 Million Man and Bigfoot fighting and, all the sci-fi stuff that was out there that we were watching on TV, to see something like Kiss, they were like superheroes,
Mhm.
with fun makeup on their faces, and then you add to that, Gene Simmons spitting blood and fire. I mean, unless you're scared of it for some reason, I mean, just how can you not like that? I mean, it's just, as a kid, that's just mind blowing stuff. It's so cool. And I argue that their music is great too. I listen to their records for their songs just as much today as I love the imagery and all the artwork.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I get why some people think they're silly and don't like them and make fun of them, but uh, I for I don't know. I get a little bit offended by people who can't understand why someone like me at that age would realize or just you know realize the greatness of what they were doing. I mean, or why that was so awesome. For kids back in the 70s. For me, it was going down the street to my friend's house, and one of those big furniture record players, that were as
Mm.
long as the wall in the room. And his parents let him turn it up to 10. He would put on a live 2, and just man, those are memories I'll never forget. How awesome that was. Specifically listening to Shock Me, and then after that, I was just hooked forever. But yeah, it's just that whole story is interesting to me about how they're so popular in other places, and I get why they're popular in Japan and places like that because of the makeup and the
Right.
show. And but yeah, it's very, and of course, like Van Halen, they're a very American band in a sense. But yeah, it's interesting that you all like weren't even exposed to it much to have the chance to see how cool it was as a 7-year-old. Am I making sense? I hope I'm not just babbling. But
Makes sense to me. I lived it.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but it's interesting.
Jeremy, your thoughts on Kiss?
Yeah, I mean, I got into them just a little bit later than that, really, and I think somebody who lent me Kiss Alive 2, and I listened to that album, and I saw the theatrics of it all, and that's for me is why they're in here. I think if Kiss didn't have the makeup and the everything that goes with the band, the merchandise and what have you, yeah, I think that just their music alone may not have just been enough, but they had everything. They put it all together into a package, and so the package itself is what stands the test of time, really. They did start in the 1970s. They started early. They played, sort of more stripped back type of music then as well on the early albums, and that I think that's better. I think looking back on it now, listening to those albums, I like that stuff much better than the 80s and the 90s sort of Kiss that's since that came out. So it's not a surprise that they're in the top 10 at all. And I'm not placing much weight, by the way, on whether these bands are 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. These are the
Right.
first 10 bands in the Hall of Fame, and these are
Right.
all
Yeah.
fantastic bands. And they're in there for a reason. They were the very first band to really do this kind of thing, to do the theatrics, to do the fire on stage and the wearing all that, looking, amazing. And they sold rock and roll, and that's what
Mhm.
rock and roll needed. It needed people to sell it.
That's another great point. If Kiss came out today, it'd just be another band doing something that everybody's done before. Back then,
Yeah.
it wasn't. I mean, you had things
Yeah.
leading up to it they borrowed from, like Alice Cooper. But yeah, I mean, that was the first time us kids were seeing something that incredible. So it was
Yeah.
mind blowing back then. Absolutely mind blowing. Yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of gave rise to a band that won the Eurovision Song Contest. I mean, you wouldn't have had a Lordi without a Kiss.
Right.
Mhm.
Absolutely true.
Yeah. Johan,
Yeah, I think you've got to, even if you think they're silly, you've got to respect them, or I have a hard time respecting you.
there you go. Johan, Kiss in Sweden.
Huge. Always were. They were here in 1976 in Stockholm. Played at our biggest amusement park. So ever since that, they were a big item here. Still are. There is. They played their final show here at in Dalhalla. It's called. It's like a big mining. It's a natural concert area.
Mhm.
A big pit, couple of hundreds deep. Very good for concerts. And Kiss choose to play the last show there. So Kiss were and is huge here in Sweden. Kiss is a big reason that Sweden Rock exists and other Swedish metal festivals and so on. So um, Sweden may be a small country, but uh, the impact of Kiss were, and I'm not exaggerating, they were huge here, and they still are. Even though perhaps people laugh at Gene Simmons, what he says nowadays, and so, but they're huge. So, and for the personal matter, Creatures of the Night, Lick It Up, and Animalize and Asylum is my absolute favorite albums by Kiss.
That's
There
good
you
I had
go.
to
stuff.
say, I had to say that.
Yeah, that's fine. That's good stuff. It all is.
Yeah.
So you're saying that they were popular where you live,
Yeah,
Johan, even when you were a kid, or was
absolutely.
it like after in the '80s later on, or
No,
like
huge.
Edgar Winterson said that it wasn't until Crazy Nights that they became massive where he lives.
Yeah.
No, no. Uh,
Okay,
long before, long before.
yeah. So you were exposed to it more than Jeremy was
I don't know,
as
perhaps.
growing up, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, Sweden and UK are
Feel sorry for
similar,
you, Jeremy, that
but
you missed
different.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm taking up too much time. You better
No,
continue.
no, just go on.
It's all interesting, though.
Crazy Nights was a big hit in the song. They even played that all the way up until the end when they were in the UK because it charted. I think it was like number 3 in the UK. Of course, it was the Bon Jovi "Wannabe" album, which is the one that charted
Yeah.
high. There, they ended up second band on the bill at Monsters of Rock that year as well. Where just to stir shit up, Gene and Paul said, "Well, why are we going on before Iron Maiden when Iron Maiden used to open up for us and stuff like that?" But that's the showman in them. All right, so moving on.
Number 4.
Would help if I had the right screen open here. Here we go. Number 4, the New Yardbirds, also known as Led Zeppelin. This is so interesting because there's very few points or votes, I should say, separating Judas Priest, Kiss, and Led Zeppelin. And there's very few separating them from the first 3 bands. And I think what Jeremy said before is very important, that regardless of how much or who got the most votes in the end, what's important is that the initial class are these 10 that are going in. Zeppelin to me was huge. I mean, my brother brought home Led Zeppelin 4 and then Physical Graffiti, and it was like, what's this? Up until then, it was Kiss, my folks' records, and I don't know if we had Back in Black yet, or if we had The Wall or Scream Dream by Ted Nugent or stuff like that yet. But I remember listening to Zeppelin for the first time, and hearing those monstrous John Bonham beats and the soaring vocals and John Paul Jones all over the place on bass and keyboards and Jimmy Page. I mean, they're a hugely influential band for me personally. I absolutely love them. It's a shame that they've never done more, where this is a case where I get it. The mystique is there to an extent because of it. But at the same time, with Jason being around, Jason Bonham, it's a shame that they didn't try to do more stuff with him. I know that Plant and Page did get back together again, and I was listening to Walking into Clarksville a few months back, and it's an okay album, but it's missing the other ingredients. You know, it's missing John Paul Jones is huge in that band. I think those 4 guys were just huge. Johann, Led Zeppelin?
Hmm? I'm happy to say nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, perhaps I'm one of the hard rocking lovers in the world that I don't have an opinion about this band.
Okay.
I don't think they are metal or hard rock. I can't compare them to Deep Purple or Sabbath because they are something else and they don't appeal to me.
Okay.
Never had. So I'm not the right person to ask about them. So I'm so sorry. They have some decent songs, but I think they are extremely overrated.
Oh, that hurts a little bit there.
Yeah, that was a dig.
What did you say, Ed?
I said that hurt a little bit.
Yeah, you've hurt us all.
Yeah,
right,
I'm really looking forward to hear you guys what you. I'm probably alone in this world to think this, but yeah, yeah. You heard my opinion. So go ahead, guys.
As Johann is saying that, this goes off around the world. The needle goes across the vinyl album there. Jeremy, since they're a UK band, take it.
Yeah. Well, when I was a young kid, and this is very young, Ed just mentioned 7 years old, Kiss. I mean, I was 7 years old, 8 years old. I was staying at my grand's house, and my auntie had a copy of Physical Graffiti, and it was sitting there, in the room where I was staying overnight, and there was a little record player. So I picked up this album and I put it on, and it blew my mind. I could not believe what I was listening to. In My Time of Dying was one of my favorite songs on it, actually, not Kashmir or Custard Pie. I like those as well, but I just couldn't believe the drumming on it, and I'm not a drumming man really, but incredible songs and such a varied selection of songs. They could play folk music on an album and heavy metal. It's quite extraordinary, really, what they could do on an entire album. They didn't always get it right. There were certain albums later on in the career where there was, a little bit of hodgepodge going on. But generally speaking, they really pushed the boundaries, and that's what I liked about them. They're very, very creative, very, very creative, and they influenced so many people over the years. And they did it first, and you couldn't have. I don't think you could have a Hall of Fame without Led Zeppelin as an original member. It just wouldn't be possible. It's almost like we listen. No, I don't think any of you now listen to Led Zeppelin 4 at the moment because you've heard it so many times. But if you put it on tomorrow, you'd still marvel at how good it is. And that's Led Zeppelin in a nutshell, really.
Yeah, Zeppelin for me is a band that U.S. radio has destroyed them for me.
That is one problem.
Yeah, because we're talking about songs that make it on the radio from bands. I would say that there's maybe 3 or 4 songs from their entire catalog that do not get played on US radio every single day.
Yeah.
There's 3 or 4 that do not.
Hmm.
So they're
But
playing almost everything.
I have a question, Victor.
Yes.
How is that possible? Because in my ears, Led Zeppelin is not like a mainstream band, or
Oh,
is it in your
very
ears?
in the US, very mainstream.
How is that possible?
Stairway to Heaven. I mean, as a
Stairway to
kid,
Heaven.
Yes, that song, but I mean all the others.
Over the Hills and Far Away,
Rock
All
and
of My
Roll.
Love, Kashmir, 10 Years Gone, Gallows Pole, The Ocean, Living, Loving. What the hell's the name of that song on Led
I
Zeppelin?
wonder how
Just Whole Lot
can
Love
a
as well.
country that loves Led Zeppelin in the 70s love Motley Crue? I mean, just a couple of years after that.
Easy,
To me,
because Robert Plant was a huge influence on Vince Neil. All the screams and moves and stuff like that. Vince Neil was a mix of David Lee Roth and Robert Plant.
yes,
Yeah.
but not the music.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but as Victor
Can you-
says, you can like pizza. You
Yeah,
can
yeah,
like
I
burger.
understand, but the music. Can you hear the music in Motley Crue from Led Zeppelin?
Yes, yeah, in the drumming, you can hear it. John Bonham is a huge influence on Tommy Lee. The way that Tommy Lee plays behind the beat, the way that he mixes a lot of. I was listening to Motley Crue today. Primal Scream. Primal Scream has always reminded me of Led Zeppelin. There's several different parts of that song coming out of the chorus. What they're playing, that's Led Zeppelin 100%. Then the way that Tommy's playing throughout the song, he's playing cowbell, hi-hat, and ride cymbal at the same time. They're mixed in over one another. That's something that John Bonham would do all the time, where he would add different percussive elements in there. Tommy's playing a superly big bass drum because of John Bonham, and just the syncopated way that he plays is very similar. I picked up a lot of their playing. I would say me as a drummer, with Kiss being my favorite band, I probably play a lot more closer to being a mix of John Bonham, Tommy Lee, and Bill Ward as a drummer than say Peter Criss or Eric Carr, people like that. I can play that stuff, but I gravitated more to the groove and stuff like that they did. And you have a band like Rage Against the Machine. Rage Against the Machine is 100% influenced by Led Zeppelin, Aerosmith, Kiss. There's a lot of bands that even you wouldn't think of it, but that Zeppelin has a lot to do with what they're doing. I think without Zeppelin, you don't get Metallica doing certain things as well with the acoustic intros and stuff like that. A lot of that has to do with Randy Rhoads and Michael Schenker, but a lot of it also has to do with Led Zeppelin as well.
Okay.
Ed Zeppelin.
Yeah, I had a hard time knowing whether to put him on the list because I agree with Johan. I don't consider them. They can be hard rock at times, but they're not a full-on hard rock band. It's like Jeremy said, they do so many different genres very well. And I was really offended by VH1 when they did their top 100 best metal bands or whatever about 20 years ago, and of course they had to put Led Zeppelin #1 over Black Sabbath even. And it's just ridiculous. If it's going to be a heavy metal. Now, if we're talking about rock, they would have probably even been a little higher on my list. But I put them on my list because, yeah, I think they have a massive influence on the music scene, even more so than Kiss and AC/DC and Judas Priest. And I think that the main link to hard rock and heavy metal between Zeppelin and those bands that we've grown up with is, like Victor said, John Bonham. The way that man plays drums has just influenced everything we listen to.
Mm-hmm.
And then also Robert Plant, man, his voice is
Yep.
just, I love him. I also love all the folk stuff that he does, even now solo and with Alison Krauss. One of the best shows I've seen in my life was Robert Plant and Alison Krauss.
Oh wow.
You know, he's just, his voice is just sensational, with all kinds of music like that. And you can hear, especially in 80s metal, so much Robert Plant and so many rock stars. And so many rock stars wanted to be like Robert Plant too. And too, when we were young, we used to love, I'm not encouraging people to get wasted, but when you get wasted, one of the best movies in the world to watch is The Song Remains the Same.
Oh wow.
I mean, that is a great drinking, smoking film right there. We that was one of our favorite activities. So, Johan, at least do that. Get wasted one night, watch The Song Remains the Same, and then you're going to come back telling us about the beauty of Led Zeppelin. We can't wait to hear it.
I can do all that besides smoke the, yeah, you know, because in Sweden it's not legal here.
little fun fact about Led Zeppelin, by the way. You know, Top of the Pops we have here in the UK. The theme music is Whole Lot Love.
Oh wow. Didn't know that.
There you go.
All right.
But it's also the feel of their music that is so much of everything. But anyway, continue on.
Yeah. All right. So we agree for the most part that these bands should be in there. Now, I think people are going to be where the cussing and cursing is going to come are these top three.
Number 3.
Slayer. Huh.
Iron Maiden, number 3.
Have to be there.
With every countdown that we've done, Maiden has always come out on top. This is the first time that I can remember. Well, no, I take that back. Whatever year Seventh Son came out, it was 88. That was, I think, third or fourth. But I was truly expecting Maiden to be the most voted for. And it was a tie with the top 3, as I said, leading up to today when I tallied the last few votes in, and they ended up at 3. If you follow this show, you know that for me, it's Kiss is 1A and Maiden is 1B. I love both bands. Just a huge influence, a band that I've listened to so much over the years. A band that a lot of people that follow my show absolutely love as well. I mean, I don't know what else to say outside of they've been a huge part of the soundtrack of my life, and they deserve to be one of the first 10 bands to go into the Hall of Fame here. Jeremy, your thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure I can say very much more about Maiden that hasn't been said in the past. Obviously, hugely influential on they were the biggest band that came out of the new wave of British heavy metal. They designed their own sort of sound that had the sort of plinkety plonkety bass line. I call them sort of plinkety plonkety metal. So, but they're almost slightly proggy, aren't they? And they have sort of done some sort of proggy metal later in their career. They did have a lot of commercial success as well. You know, they came out with songs that, you know, got into top tens of singles lists and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, they got the famous songs that any great band has to do as well. They have some great musicians, and I think Steve Harris obviously is the man driving the force there. I mean, he is Iron Maiden. He is the one of the greatest bass players, I think, in heavy metal. And they had the image, just like we've talked about. Some of these other bands had a great image. They had an image from the start. They realised that you need that to push the bands along and sort of get an audience. And that they've survived to this very day as still probably the biggest British metal band that's going now. I can't think of one that's bigger. So yeah, they deserve to be in here, absolutely. Everyone's probably heard of Iron Maiden, just like AC/DC and Metallica. You know, they're all big names that any even non-metal fan will have heard of and probably likes and would want to go and see live. Great shows live. And that the fact that they toured, you know, 300 days a year, every year through their early years is probably one of the reasons why, you know, we're talking about them today.
Excellent. Ed, Maiden?
I didn't expect to be talking about them until our next list. I didn't like. They definitely have to be in there at some point. I just put bands that came before them on my list. But now, yeah, of course, though, their influence on heavy metal is, I mean, it'd be hard to describe just how deep their influence on everything goes. So yeah, they deserve to be on that was number 4.
Three.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't expect that to pop up that high just yet, but great choice. I can't argue with that. They have to be in there at some point, especially
Johan,
Eddie.
yeah. Well, that in itself has influenced how many people, how many bands, I should say, with just having the mascots. I mean, we've talked about it in the past. We've talked about Murray. We've talked about the wine team mascot, if I'm not mistaken. You could say that Quiet Riot, to an extent, with the mask, also did something similar. So, yeah, it's huge. Johan, Maiden.
Maiden is probably the biggest metal band here in Sweden over time. So everything has been said about them, the music and everything else. But when Maiden comes to Sweden, it's special. Nowadays they play outdoors, they play the big arenas, but I think that they started out in the small in the small handball, if you know that sport, arenas. Yeah. In 1980, and they worked their way up to the big ice halls, and there they stayed for a couple of years. But now, when they come, they are playing the biggest always. So in Sweden, Iron Maiden is it's when Maiden comes, if you're a metalhead, you go. That's the I think that everything else has been said about this band, so we go on.
Okay. 2 bands to go. Let me get my screen ready here.
Number 2.
Black Sabbath. Again, the band that probably influenced more bands in this subgenre or this genre of rock, or however you want to say, hard rock, metal, doom metal, stoner rock, stoner metal, on and on. You can add different adjectives, but Sabbath is a huge influence. Even throughout the lineups, we talked about Deep Purple before. I mean, I I displayed the original 4 there: Ozzy, Tony, Geezer, and Bill. You could talk about Dio being in the lineup. You could talk about Ian Gillan being in the lineup, and even with the recent reissues with Tony Martin, although I know that there's a certain pocket of the Sabbath crowd and a lot of the more popular fans don't like the Tony Martin stuff. I love that as well. It makes all the sense in the world that Sabbath is one of the first 10 bands to make it in here, in my opinion. I wouldn't expect it any way else. There are other bands that I was like, similar to what you said, Ed. Okay. Cool that they're there. I would have thought that within the first 2 years they would have gone in. So I have no problem with them. But there are others that had they've been excluded, I would have been kind
It
of
would make
upset.
sense.
Yeah, it would have been like, well, they need to be in there, you know? So Sabbath is a must in here, in my opinion. Yeah.
I'm racking my brain trying to think of who got more votes than Sabbath. I'm more interested now in that than to talk about Sabbath, because I don't understand who could be more influential, especially after we've already chosen Deep Purple and Zeppelin. Unless people are going to give Alice Cooper that much credit, I don't. Yeah, but yeah, Sabbath to me is the beginning of heavy metal. Not that there weren't heavy metal sounds before that, but they put it all together into that first heavy metal package, and throughout every record experimented with different things within that genre that just made them more heavy metal with each record, all the way up through Sabotage at least. And man, from the first note, or I guess the first thunder of Black Sabbath to the last note of Sabotage, it's just heavy metal perfection. And every single one of those members have influenced every band and every musician, even if they don't know it. If you're a hard rock and metal musician, you've got Black Sabbath in your blood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Johan, Black Sabbath?
Well, it's oh, a great, absolutely great band. Um, I love every record, almost, except for the last Tori Martin record and the Ron James Dio comeback record. I love no, oh, but somehow I love every one of them. But Sabbath is, of course, like Maiden. Everything has been said. They have done the best records. I listen to them every week. Every week, I go back and listen to early Ozzy. I listen to Tony Martin stuff. I think Tony Iommi is a genius in riffing. I don't know who writes the song melodies, but If it's the singer, it's good, um, because they always had great uh, melodies for the vocals. Like I said, everything has been said. I don't want to go into the specific records or anything because, yeah, you know.
Yeah, we'll be here all night talking about the goodness of those records.
Yeah, I know, Ed. I know. Yeah, no, it's some bad, but 95% is amazing.
Have you listened to the last Tony Martin record with the new remix?
Nope. Soul album?
No. Forbidden, the last one that he did with Sabbath. You're saying that you don't like that album. Listen to the
Oh,
they remixed it last year and they put it
yeah,
back out again.
Forbidden.
Yeah.
Like I've I've listened to it, but not uh, with the no. I listened, but not with my heart. I listened to
Okay.
it, but it was. I had a. I thought about it before when I listened to it, and it was so sorry because of the bad English.
No, that's fine.
I I have I have all thought out in Swedish, but I can't pronounce it.
That's fine. That's fine.
So sorry.
That's
So sorry.
that's that's my number one listened to album last year.
Hmm.
So that's why I'm saying the remix.
Ah,
I really, as much as I like the original version, I really like what they've done with some of the songs on with the remix version, because there are songs that I think they've brought other elements out of them to make them sound a lot better than the original. So anyway, Jeremy, go ahead. Black Sabbath.
There's a reason why they're in this Hall of Fame. Obviously, they've influenced so many bands. They created their own genre, the sort of doom metal genre, which is going on today. They had one of the greatest heavy metal guitarists of all time, because of he had a problem with his finger, and it made him do those sort of very chunky riffs. Um, they they created quite a few songs that I would put in my top 10 of all time. War Pigs would definitely be in my top 10 metal songs of all time. Falling Off the Edge of the World has about 3 different riffs in that song, and yet is probably one of the greatest metal songs of all time. And then Into the Void, another one with absolutely amazing riffs going on, not just one, but again, several. So, to do that sort of stuff all in one. And the other thing I would say is that when I was growing up, I was about sort of 11, 12 when I first heard Black Sabbath. I heard the debut album, and they frightened me to death. I mean, I was brought up, Ed will probably be in the same sort of situation. I was brought up in a moderately religious family. And I had to hide the album, really. I mean, the name itself, Black Sabbath, was not something you'd want to shout about. And to hear the tolling of the bell, this is something that was alien to my kind of life at the time, and yet it was something I wanted to hear more of, and think about what they were doing, why they were doing this, and why I liked it. So yeah, they were just very, very different, and they incorporate the blues a bit in their early stuff, but then they tossed that aside and just went into sort of more of the metal stuff. And the other thing, just to finally say, is that they then went on, after having Ozzy for so long, and produced 2 of the greatest metal albums with Dio that of all, they were incredible, and you can't even choose between them. Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, probably equal albums, in terms of content, quality. Amazing stuff, and they influenced a lot of people, and still do today. You can see with this final concert they're going to do at Villa Park how many people want to turn up and play.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all turns out. We already know that every band there's just going to be playing Sabbath, so it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully, we all get to see that at one point in the future. All right. So
Number 1.
still intrigued, Ed?
Yes, I can't wait here.
Or you think
I haven't figured it out.
you haven't figured it out?
The only
Jeremy?
thing I can think is Alice Cooper because of, his imagery and the way that's affected so much of metal. But I don't think there's enough Alice Cooper fans for him to be number one. Maybe.
Johan, you're agreeing to what Jeremy just wrote?
Sure.
Celtic Frost. Or no, that's
No.
wrong. That's
That's not me.
Go to commercial.
Metallica.
I've got Metallica.
Oh, I didn't think about. Yeah, that's probably what it is.
Number
I'm
1.
thinking early. Yeah, never mind. I get it. Okay. I'm just thinking too early.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
what ultimately ended up happening here, because when I proposed this, a lot of people started asking, well, should I pick early bands? And I said, well, if you want to pick early bands, sure. And then I said, you know what? Pick whatever 10 bands you want.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, I want this to focus on bands that we love listening to and that, have a big influence, out of the entire genre, Metallica is the biggest band.
Yeah.
Having said that, 1 point separates them from Sabbath, and 1 point separates Sabbath from Iron Maiden. So
they're all up there together. Yeah.
they're all 10 of these bands to me are hugely influential and deserve to be there. And the bands that are on the outskirts looking in, if I go out to 20, I can't really argue with any of those bands either. If I go beyond that, 11 was Slayer, 12 is Scorpions, 13 is Pantera, 14 is Thin Lizzy, 15 is Motorhead, 16 is Alice Cooper, 17 Motley Crue, 18 Aerosmith, 19 Anthrax, 20 Megadeth. All right. When we get to the 20s, it starts to become a little bit more varied because we have Alice in Chains, Dio, Korn, Guns N' Roses, Ozzy Osbourne as a solo artist, The Who, Nirvana, UFO, Queen, and at 30 is Soundgarden. To me, these are all bands that have formed the soundtrack of my life. So the top 10 need to be there. Those 10 bands need to be in there. We can argue 11 through 30 if any of those could be in there or what the importance is. But I think as time goes by and we listen to a lot of this stuff, there's almost like no wrong answer, because
that's right.
all of these bands have put out such great music that they've all taken up a lot of space and time in our lives. But getting back to Metallica, Ed, Metallica for you.
Yeah, that was life-changing for me, Metallica. That's when I went, because I was always looking for something a little bit heavier. Anything heavier, was attracted me. And so when I heard them on the Metal Shop that one night, I've told you that story. Boy, I went to the mall the next day and bought that Ride the Lightning as soon as I could. And I'll never forget those days of how exciting it was to listen to that record, especially when I brought it home and heard Fight Fire with Fire after having heard Ride the Lightning and For Whom the Bell Tolls first.
Right.
So it was like almost two life-changing moments. One, hearing Ride the Lightning on the radio, and then bringing the cassette home and hearing Fight Fire with Fire. And I can't describe how cool that album sounded back then and how cool it looked. And it was also refreshing to see guys that weren't, doing their hair up like Dawkins started to do, and just had the jeans and t-shirts and, metal patch jackets, and was just thrashing out. That I was able to connect with. An average Joe like me, you could be like that. Just grow your hair out a little bit, look sloppy, whatever. Put your jean jackets on, your ripped up jeans, grab a guitar. It was a lot harder to try to be a glam metal musician unless you're a pretty boy and could grow your hair really long, real fast.
Right.
So it was they were like a. I mean, I know there was bands like them that preceded them, but you know that kind of music really exploded in that year with Metallica, especially I think when Ride the Lightning came out,
Mhm.
because that one was a little more probably palatable for some people.
Right.
Because a lot of people that became fans of that kind of music, they had to get used to it for a while. I remember playing that for friends of mine that did not like it, heavy metal buddies. But of course, they're all huge fans ever since then.
Right.
Yeah, that was me.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep going, Jeremy.
Yeah, I mean that was me, Ed. I didn't like Metallica at all, not one bit. I was into hair metal, I'd obviously progressed through new wave of British heavy metal into the American hair metal. Loved sort of hair metal, all that sort of stuff, all that glossy image. Metallica came out, I couldn't feel it. I just didn't feel it at all. It was I didn't know what thrash metal was. It was noise, total noise to me initially, and it was only when the Black Album came out that I enjoyed some of it, and started to get into that proper melody and beat with the heaviness. And then it was after that that I started to like thrash metal, and I started to get it. And then I went back and listened to the early stuff, and I really liked it. But obviously, they're here because a lot of people were like me in that time. I don't think they had that mass appeal initially, and they built and built their career, and they did lots of different stuff through that career. And they had the word metal in their name, which helped. They took the bat. They carried the baton for metal. I think they were sort of path breaking for that, and they were really good on the marketing side. They didn't have any gimmicks, but they had these great logos, and just had that sort of. They were edgy. Thrash metal was edgy, and they were better than bands. I know you might disagree, Victor, because I know you love Anthrax, but for me, they were better than Anthrax. They were stronger and more powerful. And they still are, and they're still going, and they managed to keep that marketing going, and still be out there pushing it for heavy metal, and they talk about all the early days, their influences, and I think that's important, and so they're definitely worthy here because they're really good at it, at what they do.
Absolutely. Johan, Metallica.
Well, to me, I discovered them through a friend back in when was Ride Lightning released? 84?
Yes.
Yeah. So it was. I love that record. It was totally mind blowing, and at the same time, I loved Motley Crue. So back in those days, that weren't a problem. You could like both Metallica and Motley Crue because both bands were, metal bands. Metallica was harder, but Motley Crue was still distorted guitars. So uh, they are an. I love that band. Everything has been said, of course. I have seen them perhaps 20 times. I don't think that's enough, but but Metallica is kind of like they are not ground zero for heavy metal because that's probably Black Sabbath, but they are great, and it's at least here in Sweden, it's good to like Metallica and still like any other band. So here, Metallica is mainstream, but it's a good mainstream, if you know what I mean. It's they are the household band for all heavy rock. So I think they deserve their position on this chart.
Mhm.
And I can discuss them all night, but there are so many things to say about them, but they deserve number one on this very important chart.
All right. Awesome. So I'm sure that all of the bands will be listening to this episode and be thrilled
Yes.
to be part of the inaugural class of the Signals from Mars Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Let's just do a quick recap here. At 10, Rush. 9, Deep Purple. 8, Van Halen. 7, AC/DC. 6, Judas Priest. 5, Kiss. 4, Led Zeppelin. 3, Iron Maiden. 2, Black Sabbath. And 1, Metallica. But I think the overwhelming kind of reaction from all of us is that this is a complete class all onto itself, and regardless of how many votes one band got or another, this is the foundation that we're laying for this Hall of Fame. So I think it's very important. I want to thank everyone that's joined us tonight. We had Edgar Winterson in the chat. We have obviously Johan in Sweden. We have Ed in Kentucky, and we have Jeremy in the UK. And that is it, folks. Thanks again for watching the episode or listening to the replay. And we will see you next time right here on Signals from Mars. See you, folks.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching the Signals from Mars live stream. You can watch the show live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch, or check out replays on YouTube. Go to signalsfrommars.com for more information. This concludes our show.